Good afternoon. I'm still reporting on the coup. God bless the Epoch Times. They have a bunch of genius editors and producers up there in New York who just pump out this continuous stream of the best news content in the world. It's so much that I can't possibly keep up with just their output. Here is a perfect example. It's a pretty simple topic that will never get a big clickbait headline, but it is absolutely essential for us to focus on, to tackle to some level of completeness before the coming presidential election, not after. Watch this.
A recent poll found that in the 2020 election, 1 in 5 people who voted by mail committed some type of voter fraud. That is, by the way, according to the people's own admissions. And the details of this particular survey are wild. Let's go through it together. To start with, this poll was conducted jointly by Rasmussen alongside the Heartland Institute. And in terms of demographics, they were polling 1,085 voters, among whom 33% were Republican, 36% were Democrat, and 31% were other. And then in terms of these people's ages, 32% were 18 to 39, 46% were 40 to 64, and 22% were 65 years or older. And so you can say that this was a pretty good sample. Just looking at the broad overview of the demographics, it looked fairly representative of the American public. However, this is where things, you can say, got really interesting. Because the questions regarding the 2020 election, they began with a simple question, simply asking the respondent who they voted for. Here is specifically how that question was worded. Quote, "We are now going to ask you several questions about voting in the 2020 presidential election. Your responses will remain anonymous, so please answer honestly. Who did you vote for in the 2020 presidential election?" And according to the results, 45% said that they voted for Trump, 46% said that they voted for Biden, and 4% said that they voted for another candidate. Okay, so the next question asked the respondents about whether or not they voted by mail in 2020, to which 30% said that they did. And that for the ones who said that they did in fact vote by mail, they were asked a series of follow-up questions, which revealed some startling facts. For instance, 17% of these mail-in voters admitted that in the year 2020, they voted in a state where they were no longer a permanent resident. 21% of them admitted to filing a ballot for a friend or family member. 17% of them said that they signed a ballot for a friend or family member with or without his or her permission. And these answers are indeed truly shocking when taken in the context of the fact that these actions were patently illegal in almost every single state in the year 2020. For instance, 21% of the people who voted by mail said that they filled out a ballot on behalf of a friend or a family member. Well, filling out a ballot on behalf of someone else is illegal in all 50 states. Likewise, 17% of the mail-in voters said that they voted in a state where they were no longer a permanent resident, while another 17% said that they signed a ballot on behalf of a friend or a family member. However, both of those two activities are illegal. If an election official catches someone either voting in a state where they are no longer a permanent resident, or if they catch someone forging a signature on a ballot or a ballot envelope, well, those fraudulent activities make those actual votes invalid, at least according to the technical letter of the law.
Technical letter of the law? Correct me if I'm wrong. However, I believe those are also prosecutable crimes, punishable by death if you are a Trump supporter, or punishable by forgiveness of your next 6 car payments if a Democrat, or your next 10 car payments if a rhino.
Furthermore, another question was asked not just of the people who voted by mail, but it was asked to anyone who voted in the year 2020, and that question revealed that, quote, 8% of all the voters said that they were offered some type of payment or some kind of a reward for voting in the 2020 election. And then, on top of that, there was another question that asked all the voters, not about themselves, but rather about their friends, their family, their coworkers, and their acquaintances. And that question revealed that aside from the people themselves, 10% of all the respondents claimed that they knew a friend, a family member, a coworker, or some other acquaintance who admitted that he or she cast a mail-in ballot in 2020 in a state other than his or her state of permanent residence, which is again illegal. Then another question on the survey, it revealed that 11% of all the voters, they knew a friend, a family member, a coworker, or an acquaintance who admitted to them that he or she filled out a ballot on behalf of another person, which is, again, as we discussed earlier, illegal with very, very, very few exceptions.
Good Lord. I'll bet that I know 1,000 people well enough to say that not a single one of them who are Trump supporters would ever do such a thing because borderline treason. So you have to assume that every single one of those would be a Democrat or a rhino, a crooked Republican.
And what's really funny about this particular survey is that the way that these questions were framed, well, the people answering them might not have even realized that what they did qualifies as election fraud. Maybe they just thought that they were answering a simple question without realizing that their answer actually disqualified their ballot, according to, again, the letter of the law. And the severity of these results, well, I mean, they speak for themselves. There's really not much you need to add when you have 20% of mail-in voters admitting to committing some type of potential voter fraud, and then saying, furthermore, that 10% of them also have at least one person that they know who committed mail-in voter fraud. For your reference, by the way, in the year 2020, a record 43% of all votes were cast by mail. And so the scale of this problem is quite obvious. Now, in summing up these findings, here's what the pollster wrote. Quote, the poll found that 1 in 5 voters who cast mail-in ballots during the 2020 presidential election admit to participating in at least one kind of voter fraud. Taken together, the results of these survey questions appear to show that voter fraud was widespread in the 2020 election, especially among those who cast mail-in ballots. Furthermore, this was then followed up by a statement from Mr. Justin Haskins. He is both the director of the Socialism Research Center over at the Heartland Institute, as well as the primary author of the survey, and here's what he wrote about the results. Quote, the results of the survey are nothing short of stunning. For the past 3 years, Americans have repeatedly been told that the 2020 election was the most secure in history. But if this poll's findings are reflective of reality, the exact opposite is true. This conclusion isn't based on conspiracy theories or suspect evidence, but rather from the responses made directly by the voters themselves. A democratic republic cannot survive if election laws allow voters to commit fraud easily, and that's exactly what occurred during the 2020 election. Although some progress has been made in more than a dozen states since the conclusion of the 2020 election, much more work is needed in most regions of the United States. If America's election laws do not improve soon, voters and politicians will continue to question the truthfulness and fairness of all future elections. Which I think encapsulates these results quite well, because after all, the media can claim that there was no quote-unquote evidence of election fraud, but here you have 20% of the people themselves saying that they committed it. Now, once this data was made public, President Trump took to his own social media platform, Truth Social, to write the following statement regarding these numbers. Quote, this is the biggest story of the year, and Republicans must do something about it. Don't be Mitch McConnell and his gang of rhinos. Have to make a move now. Get tough, get smart. Our country is being stolen. Now, in terms of these specifics, on this program on Facts Matter, we have covered many different concrete examples of voter fraud. Seniors in nursing homes getting exploited for their votes, good old-fashioned ballot stuffing, paying off judges and election officials, paying off homeless people to come and vote, running quote-unquote raffles to get people to come out and vote, election officials who just ignored the letter of the law and set up unmanned illegal drop boxes, as well as a myriad of other tricks and techniques that have been utilized over the past several years. You can, of course, go back and find many of those episodes here on Epic TV, and moving forward, we will, of course, continue to cover instances of election fraud as they come out one after the other. However, one of the biggest problems is that the mainstream legacy news outlets, by and large, they have absolutely no appetite for the story. I mean, just look at this latest example. A serious poll found that 20% of voters who used mail-in ballots in the year 2020 admitted themselves to committing at least one form of fraud. You would assume that a normal media company would take a short break from covering Israel for a day and report on this. But if you do a quick news search, that's not the case. None of the mainstream legacy news outlets have touched this story with a 10-foot pole. Now, they might justify their lack of interest by saying to themselves, hey, you know what? This poll only surveyed 1,083 people. And even though that is statistically significant, that is a small number. And that's fair, but still, 20% of them admitted to committing voter fraud. And if you're a big media company with a lot of resources, well, commission another bigger survey to see if the results hold up. But they won't, because it appears that, at least on this subject, and frankly many other subjects, they're not really interested in the truth. The narrative is that mail-in voting is great, restrictions on mail-in voting is rooted in racism, and the 2020 election was the most secure in American history, if not in all of human history, and any evidence to the contrary, such as people themselves admitting to committing fraud, is just patently wrong. That is the current situation that we find ourselves in.
I'm still reporting from just outside the citadel of world freedom. Good day.